Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. In the 1950s, George Reeves embodied the Man of Steel in Superman's first television adaptation, from its gritty black and white beginnings to the kid-friendly color years. To this day, an entire generation reveres George as their Superman, while for others, the show remains an overlooked chapter in the character's mythology. On this podcast, we bring everyone together as we break down each episode of Adventures of Superman. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 2, Episode 21, The Golden Vulture, is the author of Flights of Fantasy, the unauthorized but true story of radio and TV's Adventures of Superman, first-time guest Michael Haid. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I'm glad to be here.
It's great to have you. I'm so glad that we were able to connect. I have a copy of your book on my shelf. I'm still making my way through, but it's been a wonderful resource so far. And before we get into this specific episode, I would love to hear just generally about your fandom of Adventures of Superman, your journey with the show, and what led you to write that book.
Well, it's a funny thing. I watched the show as a child. It's one of my earliest TV memories. And of course, as I got older, the earlier black and white episodes became much more fascinating. I think both the first and second seasons are far and away the best of the series. There are a few good color episodes, but in any event, when Gary Grossman's book came out, Superman Serial to Serial, I was, of course, absolutely ecstatic. I just happened to come across it while I was killing time in New York City. I was just browsing through a bookstore, waiting for a camera shop to open, and I found it there, and I had no idea that it had been written. And it was the smaller paperback version. I didn't realize that there was a larger version. I didn't find that out for quite a few years. But I picked it up. I read it on the bus ride home. I couldn't put it down. It was just wonderful. But as I got older, I started becoming interested in other just television production for shows that I liked. And I ended up moving to Los Angeles in 1982. And then around 87, I think it was, a fanzine called The Adventures Continue made its debut. And I was like, oh my, here are fans. And some of the articles were pretty interesting. And I thought, I wonder if I have something that I could contribute. So I started doing research on the show. And I found The Hollywood Reporter, which is a trade publication. I found it on in the library there in Hollywood. And I found out that there was real specific information, including the announcement that George Reeves had been cast in the lead. But there was information going back months before that, when they were first contemplating shifting the show from radio to TV, and all the work that went involved in terms of hiring writers and hiring other actors and securing a studio. So all of that was quite fascinating. And over the years, I contributed a number of articles about the history of the show to The Adventures Continue. And I thought that was it, because, there was no need to do a book. Gary Grossman had a book. Other people were coming out with books. Mike Bifulco did an episode guide, a book length episode guide called Superman on Television, and it was terrific for what it was, a good read. Other fans were coming out with their own self-published things, and hey, great. So I ended up doing a book first on Dragnet. It's called My Name's Friday. That was a show that I felt definitely deserved a book and didn't have one yet. So I ended up writing that. And at the same time I wrote that, a Jack Webb biography came out from a fellow named Dan Moyer, who was going to marry Jack's oldest daughter before she tragically passed away in an auto accident. But he knew the family and had some inside stories. So the two of us came out with these books at roughly the same time. And then I got involved with the Metropolitan Washington Old Time Radio Club, having moved to the Washington, D.C. area. And then from that, I started becoming more interested in the Superman radio show, which is an area that Gary did not cover to a great extent in his book. He basically sums it up in about 3 or 4 paragraphs. And I knew there was more to that story. So I thought, well, I can at least maybe do a book on the radio show. But what else can be said about the TV after all these years? Then I found out that the scripts for the TV shows were at the Library of Congress. And now I've got a wealth of information, that stuff that nobody knows, scenes that were just chopped for time, 2 scripts that had never been filmed, that had to be put on the back burner, one for the first season and one for the second. And those scripts were at the Library of Congress, and I was able, okay, here's 2 episodes you never saw because they were never made. And that led me to decide, okay, well, I'll just revisit the whole series. A lot of the book is made up of the articles that I wrote for The Adventures Continue, but a lot of it is new, of course, and it's the only source for quote unquote deleted scenes from the series.
I have to tell you, that's the aspect of the book that really jumped out at me, so much so that at some point down the line, I might do sort of a bonus episode or 2 revisiting the first couple of seasons and kind of talk about some of those deleted scenes or changes from script to screen, because it really is fascinating.
If I'm allowed one shameless plug, I would say get the audiobook edition of Flights of Fantasy, because those scenes are dramatized by myself and members of the Metro Washington Old Time Radio Club. We play the parts. It's not just a dry recitation of lines. We try to put some life into it. And none of us tries to imitate any of the classic cast members, but we try to bring the characters to life. So if you enjoy the deleted scenes in that book, you'll really enjoy hearing them played out.
Oh, that's very cool. No, thank you for the tip. And your point about the radio show is well taken. Over the course of not just this podcast, but my other Superman show, I've covered a lot. I've revisited a lot of Superman across time and media. I've experienced a lot of stories for myself for the first time, but I've still really only dipped my toes in the water of the Adventures of Superman radio show. And it's something that I do hope to spend more time with down the line. It's quite a lot to go through, but it really is a fascinating early piece of Superman media for sure.
Well worth the journey. And if you enjoy the first season episodes of the TV series, then yes, you're going to just delight in the radio show, because it's made by the same producer, Robert Maxwell, and he had a lot of the same writers who wrote the early episodes. Some of the early episodes are based on radio episodes. So it's interesting to hear them in that format as well.
Yeah, we've only mentioned it on this podcast here and there, but certainly when we did the Stolen Costume in season 1, we talked about the precursor on the radio show.
Men Tell No Tales.
Yes.
Which was an interesting title.
Yes. What has been the reaction from fellow Adventures of Superman fans? What sort of responses have you gotten from the fan community to the book?
It's been generally positive. People really enjoy, the people who really want to know all the inside info, all of the minutia that went into the making of the series. those people have definitely really jumped all over it and said, yes, it's great. You are, however, the first person who has cited what I felt was the most fascinating part of the book was the all those cut scenes from the scripts. You're the only one who's ever said, "Oh yeah, I love that part. That's my favorite part." I've been waiting 20 years to hear that, buddy. So thank you very much.
Hey, my pleasure. Look, we talk about all of these episodes in great detail, and myself and the guests, we have a lot of affection and respect for the show. But at the same time, there are things that don't always add up, or we wonder why did they do this, or and so
Yeah.
and that's why seeing this is what they intended for this piece or that. It really is interesting. So I'm actually quite surprised that that other people haven't cited that to you, but I'm honored to be the first.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my last preliminary question, then we'll dive into this episode, no pun intended, with our ship here.
Yeah.
But this is a question anytime I have a new guest on, especially a veteran fan of the show, I ask this. And at this point, I can probably guess the answer, but I want to hear it from you. What is it about Adventures of Superman that has resonated with you so much from growing up watching it to writing the book? Like, what is it that's just captured you in this way?
Revisiting that episode just about a half an hour ago, I would just have to say that it's number one. George Reeves is utterly convincing in the role. He's not ever playing down to the audience. He brings his full talent to the job, and the other cast members are just wonderful. Perry White is exactly right. He's exactly the way he should be based on, how the comic books were at that time. Lois and Jimmy, no question. Maybe they could get a little stupid toward the end of the series run, but not here. They're both on their game, and Lois is feisty and determined to get a good story. It's and it the characters relate to each other really well, and it really did feel like a family. When I look at it this way: when the Christopher Reeve movies came out, and everybody was talking about them, and the special effects were so wonderful, and it just left the TV series in the dust. Yeah, great, but you know what? Do you want those people in your home every week, in your living room every week? No, I don't think so. They belong where they were on the theater screen for 2 hours of pure escapism. But if you want to spend time with people you enjoy and just marvel at the heroism, you want the TV series. There's just no question about it.
Fair enough. Actually, on that note, I do have one more question, and this is another kind of common piece that comes up because I know for a lot of Adventures of Superman fans, it sort of begins and ends with George Reeves, whereas others are sort of more open to other interpretations. So, I guess what has your journey been as a Superman fan generally? Have you experienced all the subsequent iterations? Do you stay away? What's your experience been?
Um, I don't think I've followed it since the first Brandon Ruth movie.
Okay.
I think that's the last time from that media, and I haven't read the comic books in years and years. But I have, and I confess this is probably horrible of me, but I've not watched Smallville either. It just didn't interest me. If I want to see Superman, I want to see Superman. You know, so probably maybe that's something I could get into after I retire. In the meantime, when I have lots of hours to kill. But in the meantime, though, I did enjoy Lois and Clark until the writing got really bad toward the end. But I revisited the pilot of that one, not the pilot movie, the first movie, not too long ago, and I was impressed at how good it was. Because again, you have a believable Clark Kent and a believable rivalry between he and Lois, and the emphasis wasn't so much on the special effects as it was on the characters. So for the first season of that, I enjoyed it very much. I went to see the Chris Reeve movies when they were new, um, except for four, and for the most part, I enjoyed that experience. But again, it wasn't something that I would want to revisit at home on a regular basis.
All right,
You know,
fair enough. I will say on the note of Smallville, though, what Adventures of Superman is to you, that's what Smallville is to me. So it's very, very near and dear.
very near and dear. Okay, and I'm not knocking it by
No,
any
no,
means
and
for what
I
it was. I'm sure I would like to see it at some point.
it's quite
I
a
think.
commitment. It's
Mm.
well over 200-hour long episodes, but it's quite a ride. It's quite a ride. All right, so The Golden Vulture, February 6th, 1954, written by Jackson Gillis, directed by Tommy Carr. I'm going to give my summary of the episode, and then we'll share our impressions, and we'll talk about what jumped out at us about this episode. Aboard the SS Golden Vulture, Captain McBain plays pirate and demeans his steward, Scurvy, shoving him to the ground. Scurvy puts a message in a bottle and tosses it overboard. Jim Olsen later finds it while fishing and brings it to the office. The water has washed away the writing, though Kent can make out the ship name. Lois finds out that the Golden Vulture is a real salvage vessel just off the coast, and she and Jim ride the mail ship to get there. Aboard, McBain shows off the treasures he's allegedly discovered in the Caribbean, but when Scurvy slips Jim another note about McBain being crazy and not allowing anyone to leave, McBain holds Lois and Jim and throws Scurvy in the brig. Kent, meanwhile, investigates on the dock and discovers a crate on its way to the ship labeled food that actually contains gold jewelry. Superman flies aboard, changes back to Kent, and frees Scurvy, who reveals the ship's secret operation, melting and molding modern jewelry to create forgeries of sunken treasure to sell. Kent apprehends the owner, Sanders, a known con man, but the crew intercede. Finally, Kent fights them off, but he runs into a fleeing Lois and Jim before he can change into Superman. An unhinged McBain forces Clark to walk the plank, after which Superman arrives to battle the crew. Superman disappears underwater to save Clark, who pulls Lois into the water just as she starts to suspect that Clark is Superman.
Excellent summation.
So this now gives us our roadmap for the episode. We can jump around and go where we want, but overall impressions of this, and have your feelings about this episode changed over the years as you've revisited it?
It's probably a bit more. There are some things that I question now that I absolutely did not question when I was a child, like the wisdom of Superman changing back into Kent after he gets to the ship, the wisdom of Jimmy blurting out that this paper is just the same as the note we found before, right in front of the captain. That was probably not one of his brighter moments, which is too bad because on the whole, he's a very good, smart character in this season. But this was a rare slip up for him. Yeah. Other than those things, yeah, Kent is very self-assured, very forward, and of course, takes as Grossman pointed out, he takes a lot of liberties with his secret identity in this, doing what he did, not necessarily only just flying out there and then changing back to Kent, but using his finger on the guy's back. Uh, yeah, Sanders, the confidence man. Oh boy, yeah. So there are some things that I question now that maybe are a little cringeworthy, but on the whole, the saving grace is that it has the best choreographed fight of the entire series.
Right?
That I give Phantom Ring a close second just because Superman is supposed to be invisible. That one's worked out pretty well too. But with this one, it's just amazing how well staged it is, considering how quickly they were grinding those episodes out.
Yes, I agree. And I want to follow up on a couple of things, and I'll share my take as well. Let me also mention our guest cast here. So we had Peter Whitney as Captain McBain, Vic Perrin as Scurvy. He was the control voice on Outer Limits and also voiced Sinestro on Super Friends, which was interesting. And Murray Alper as Sanders. Is there anything about any of these guest actors that you wanted to mention?
Well, Peter Whitney and George were friends. They both logged time at the Pasadena Playhouse. And it's my understanding that Peter Whitney lived in Pasadena for most of his life. He was a neighbor to a friend of ours he was a neighbor to the guy who introduced me to my wife, to
Oh,
the woman I
wow.
married. Yeah. So that was, yeah. So, he did often work. George did often try to get work for some of his buddies from the Playhouse. And that may have been one of those examples. I think it's the only episode Whitney did for the series. The other notable cast member, of course, was Vic Perrin as Scurvy. He did a lot of Dragnet over the years. Um, he was he played one of Joe Friday's partners for a while when he was in between Barton Yarborough and Ben Alexander. Um, in fact, if memory serves, it's been a while since I did the work, but I'm pretty sure he played Frank Smith for a number of radio episodes before Ben Alexander was ultimately cast for both radio and TV Dragnet. So, so it's those two mainly that really stand out for me.
Gotcha. So this is my overall take on this episode. There have been other episodes along the way, and this season in particular, where I felt like we had an interesting setup, but I didn't know if the payoff really landed. This was an episode where, for me, I actually felt the opposite, where for the first chunk of the episode, it was fine, but I wasn't totally engaged by it. But as we get deeper into it, and I think it's by the time we get to Kent investigating down on the docks, where I feel like, okay, we're kicking things into high gear here. And I felt that the reveal about what they were actually doing with the salvage vessel was clever. It was a satisfying payoff to this little mystery that we've had here. And yes, the climax where you have first Kent mixing it up and then running into Lois and Jim. And one of the things we talk about on this podcast all the time is the frustrated impatience of the George Reeves Clark character. And I just, in that moment where Lois and Jim were holding on to Clark as he was trying to get away to change into Superman, I felt for him. I felt like, oh man, this poor guy just wants to be rid of you two. And then, like you said, the choreography of that final fight scene, it was really something. We actually had another thing we talk about on the show all the time. I quite enjoyed the fisticuffs of season 1. I love that Superman was throwing punches. I know it doesn't line up with what we typically think of with the character fighting civilians using punches.
He is using punches that hard, yeah.
Right. But there's something visceral and thrilling about it, and I have missed that in season 2, where now we have the heads getting bonked together, and we've got the karate chop, and it's fine. But here he actually threw a couple of punches, and it was thrilling.
Yep, I agree. It was it was just so well laid out, considering the limitations of the space that they had to work with. And I love when he hurls that ladder in the next shot as you see them all with their heads through the rungs.
That was such a great touch. When I saw that, I was like, man, this is really, I was impressed at the duration of, and again, the fact that there's sort of the two acts to it, where you have the Clark part and then the Superman part. So the fact that it kind of went on as long as it did, it was very action packed. We had a bunch of crew members, so there were a lot of people involved in this. So I thought it was very effective. As far as, again, stretching the suspension of disbelief about the identity, I wish we had kept account this season of the number of times Clark is seen without his glasses, because it's come up a good number of times now. It doesn't bother me, though. I've said this before, and I'll say it quickly again now. It doesn't bother me because I think it just kind of speaks to this larger idea. It's not only the glasses that keep people from putting this together, right? It can't just be the glasses. It's all of it. And so the fact that, every now and then they see him without, I can buy that they're not like, oh my God, Superman. It's part of buying into all of this. But again, I think it does speak to this larger disguise, that it's not just the glasses.
Right. Agreed. Yeah, and I know what you're talking about. There's the clown who cried, Panic in the Sky, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times it happens in this season.
I think, honestly, though, the most egregious one is at the very beginning of the season, when there's the bomb in the car when Lois and Clark are driving.
Yeah, and he tears off his glasses.
Yeah, I mean, he makes this...
Forgot about that one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as Clark, he makes this crazy heroic save, and he walks up with no glasses, if ever there were a time. But yeah, it's interesting that it's kind of emerged as a little bit of a theme this season. Other things that stood out to you about the episode?
The music, of course, helps considerably. I mean, it's the same pieces that turn up time and again, but That particular batch of music was especially good. It was a different package than the one that was used in the first season, and it just really helps bring those episodes to life. It fits so well.
It does. I don't want to take away from that because I agree. However, watching them in quick succession, like I have been doing this podcast,
Yeah.
it does dull the effect a little bit
Mm.
when you, because it is epic and it contributes to building the tension. But when it's, you kind of use episode after episode, it's kind of like, all right, kind of.
And for me, it's been a lot of years since I just sat down and watched an episode for fun, and it just jumped right out at me. Oh yeah, it's got the good music.
Yes,
It's got the really good suspense music when we're on the dock, and it's got the really good fight music when we're having that battle royale. So yeah.
exactly.
So I don't binge anymore. Not since I wrote the book.
Fair. No, fair enough. And I'm sure if I were watching these at a more spaced out pace, or if I even just watching them weekly, it wouldn't register as much, but it's just that, kind of watching them quickly together, it does sort of have that effect. I'll also say, I think that opening scene where you have McBain and Scurvy, do we think Scurvy is actually his name, or that's just what McBain calls him?
It's you know, it's a nickname for this guy. It's I'm sure McBain renamed all his crew in the interests of becoming a genuine pirate, wanting to fly the Jolly Roger yet. He's
Yeah.
clearly lost his mind,
Well,
and we're meant to know that.
no, exactly. I was going to say that the first scene, he is particularly cruel, verbally and physically, towards Scurvy, mocking him when he's like, "Did you ever play pirate when you were a kid?" He's like, "Perhaps not, sir." And he mocks him for being so timid and calling him sir, shoves him to the ground, pushes him out of the room. And yes, he is really buying into this whole pirate shtick. And I will be honest, for, again, the first part of the episode, I kind of felt like, all right, I could kind of take or leave this aspect of the character. But great payoff, because when you get to the end and McBain, still in full pirate mode, makes Clark walk the plank, you have even Sanders, the owner of the ship, the mastermind of this whole thing, being like, all right, take it easy. So I love how unhinged this guy was, especially in relation to his other cohorts. It ended up being pretty effective.
And that's one of Gillis's little twists. You'll notice in the beginning, that first scene that you mentioned between McBain and Scurvy, he says, "Nobody's getting off this ship, least of all you." Now, there has to be a reason for that. And later on, we discover that Scurvy knows exactly what's going on and exactly what they're doing as he explains it to Kent. So he's important to the success of this particular con job. We don't necessarily know what it is, what his contribution is, but that doesn't matter. He knows what's going on, and he knows why it's going on, and he knows who's involved. So yeah, he's definitely not getting off that ship.
Totally. So a couple of things I wanted to mention about Jim. First of all, kudos to the show for actually filming the scene where Jim finds the bottle when he's out fishing, because
Oh yeah, watching that, I was thinking, I didn't really pay attention, but I'll bet that scene pleased a lot of the teenage girls who were watching that night.
that's the thing. I mean, Jack Larson, young in his prime, he looked great in his bathing suit, short shorts by today's standards.
Yeah. That was like maybe 1.5 steps removed from a Speedo.
But
suit.
I wouldn't have begrudged them if we just didn't have that scene and we just cut to the Daily Planet. He's like, "Look what I found while I was fishing." So I kudos for filming that. And yes, I'm sure that the audience, the audience appreciated that. But I want to follow up on something you mentioned before, because this was, it really, really jumped out at me how Jim blows it so spectacularly when he and Lois are aboard the ship and Scurvy slips him a note very, very sneakily, right? And then Lois makes that remark because she notices that the bottle that McBain has is just like the one that Jim found. And no poker face on this kid, like no poker face. He just blurts it out. He blows the whole thing. To your point, though, I know it's easy to kind of be like, oh, well, silly Jim. But again, I feel like the Jim that we've seen so far, I feel like he was capable of a little bit more. I was disappointed with him in this moment.
Well, you notice Lois doesn't, just blurt anything out. She's trying to be sly about it.
Yep.
Doesn't this bottle have an interesting design? And hoping that Jim will go in that direction. But Jim is right now, he's so awed with the treasure and with the whole idea of the ship that he gets carried away. So in that sense, I can buy it. I had to think about that a little bit. When it was happening, I was like, oh, good Lord, not that. But yeah, it's not beyond the realm of his character. Let's put it that way.
Fair enough. And
even as defined in season 2.
Fair. And I did find one of his lines very amusing when McBain makes it clear they're not leaving. And he has this line about, my mother gets worried if I don't come home around now. So that was entertaining. You mentioned this before. This was another thing I wanted to talk more about, where Kent's investigating on the docks, and I love him in this. Like, this is the mode for the character that it just sings. He's so cool and calm and confident, self-assured, leaning against the crate, asking his questions, using the X-ray vision to see inside. I loved all of that. Like I said, that's when, for me, I really kind of locked into this episode when we got to that point. And so he changes to Superman to fly to the ship. And then, like we said, when he gets there, he changes back to Kent. Now, from the show's perspective, I get you want to see Clark investigating, and then you want to have this big switch again, right back into Superman. You have the bigger, like, I get that.
And you need that scene between him and Scurvy. You need it.
But what do you think is going through Clark's head? Like, why, from the character's point of view, does he change when he gets back, when he gets there? Because then it does also raise this question: how is Clark on the ship?
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose if push came to shove, he could always say that Superman dropped me off. But you'll notice that he generally doesn't lie.
Right.
In fact, the only time he ever lies about that is in this season, in the episode Shot in the Dark. And I wrote about that in the book. It was that wasn't the way the line was scripted. The way he said it, you might think I'm Superman, but I'm not. He never lies. In fact, there are instructions in some of the scripts: careful not to lie when Clark is trying to explain some kind of contradiction that involves him and Superman. So, yeah. So there's that. I don't know. I mean, other than the fact that you have to have it for the story, you have to have that scene with Scurvy, you have to have the scene with Sanders, to really get a handle on what it is that is wrong with this ship before Superman can take action. And it wouldn't make sense for him to do it in costume.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess it's true. He is still in the information gathering stage at this point. I think this speaks to the way I view this version of the character, where, again, this is not the Christopher Reeve iteration where Clark is this bumbling disguise. Here, and past and future guest Rich Roney often puts it in these terms, where the Kent is who he is, and then Superman's an extension of that. And I think what you see in all these episodes is that he's really only Superman when he absolutely needs to be. He does as much as he can as Kent investigating these stories. And it's only when Superman is absolutely required that he'll make that change. So, from that perspective, I think it makes sense. And like we're saying, it gives us these great scenes with Scurvy and with Sanders, where, again, he's using his finger to mimic a gun. And it's great because he says to him, he's like, it's just my finger. And Sanders is like, I know what steel feels like, because that's what his finger feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Absolutely.
So yeah, no, that was a great bit. I think that's mostly kind of what I wanted to mention about this episode. I guess when we get to the very end here, Superman is really toying with Lois and Jim with respect to saving Clark. They're imploring Superman, go save Clark. He's in the water. And Superman is apparently rather callous towards Kent's fate.
It's been less than a minute, Jimmy. He'll have to hold his breath a little longer. That my wife and I were watching. It cracked us both up. He's like, oh wow.
Yeah, he really has some. He really has some fun with them. Lois's concern for Clark is really on full display there.
And I can't help thinking it's a little bit of payback for putting him in that position in the first place, where he had to walk the plank.
Yes. Yeah, and then as Clark, he has his fun with her as well when he pulls her in to the water.
Oh yeah, nope. Sorry, you're getting a little too close to home here. So he does something completely ungallant.
Look, overall, the mileage I got out of this episode probably fairly limited, but I do say to myself, I imagine watching this as a kid, the pirate-esque aspect of this was probably pretty fun. Do you have that memory of that piece of it appealing to you in any way?
Yeah, it was an interesting story. But I think I got the story more when I was older. When I was a kid, it was all about that fight scene. It was all about thrilling to Clark managing to dodge everybody until Lois and Jimmy gum him up. And then when Superman shows up on the scene, wow, that just brought everything to life. So yeah, as a child, I longed for those moments. And that one definitely did not disappoint. It's definitely a highlight for me.
Yeah, they really stuck the landing with this one. I have to give it to them. So, as I mentioned off mic, at the end of each of these episodes, we rate it on a scale of 1 to 5 fedoras, of course, 5 being the best. So how many fedoras would you give the Golden Vulture?
As a child, it would have been 5 all the way. Now I would say a good solid 4.5.
Okay.
Am I allowed a half a fedora?
Halves are fine, yeah. Fair enough. All right. We're a bit apart on this one. I'm going to go 2.5. This is kind of like right down the middle for me. Not my favorite of the season, but stronger than certain other entries. So I'll go 2.5 for this.
Okay.
So I'll include the link to your book in the show notes. Is there anything else you want to mention to folks? Anywhere in particular you want to direct them about this book that we've been talking about, or any others?
Well, you can check me out on Amazon.com. I have 5 books out now on various things, and plus one co-author job. And it just, if you like Superman, you will, and you like the adventures of Superman, I believe you will enjoy this book. As Mark Waid said, your mileage may vary depending upon how much minutia and trivia and production information fascinates you. But if it does, then you absolutely want to get a copy of Flights of Fantasy. That's about all I can say. I hope you enjoyed it. It's definitely my best-selling title.
Excellent. Well, I hope everyone will check it out. Thank you so much for joining me. It was great to meet and speak with you.
Well, thank you, Anthony, for having me.
Of course. So thank you, audience, for tuning in. Make sure you come back next week for another episode. And until then, as always, remember, only Superman can do super things. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of 2 of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey, a weekly exploration of Superman's vast 85-year mythology, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.